we are seeing a massive lift in terms of the speed with which our technologists can actually build new technology, can actually build new products. The technology tools we've got now allow us to dissect what's a good investment decision in that space in a way we couldn't a few years ago. Yeah, LLMs are great at solving for the generic use case. They're very bad at specifics.
Welcome to the Alpha Intelligence Podcast, your source for deep dives into strategies, data, and technology defining tomorrow's financial markets. Very happy to have Evan Schnidman with me. He's running Fidelity Labs, which seems like a very fun job in that there's a ton going on in AI technology. Thanks for joining.
Thrilled to be here.
You have fidelity and distribution and a long-term view. How do you figure out, okay, this is the thing we go for?
So I start from first principles, right? What do customers need, right? What problems can we solve? That's the basis for everything, and should be the basis for everything in the startup. My first startup, I made that mistake, right? I started out with something that was, I've got a solution, I've got a product. And then I had to figure out, how do I shoehorn this into solving the problem? You only live that lesson once before you realize it's actually a pretty inefficient way to build a business. For us in labs, we focus on what problems are Fidelity customers facing, and then what can we build to solve those problems? The next filter is it a big enough business? Is it a truly transformational financial technology business? Or is it just a niche thing that maybe isn't suited for a company the size of Fidelity?
What about the functionality of today's tech?
There's a couple of different lenses on that question, right? The first one is, how do you use that tech to more efficiently or more effectively build businesses? How do you get through rapid prototyping and iterating on the actual product development? How do you use AI in the actual customer experience, right? What's the technology experience for the customer? We're a lot further advanced on the first part of that than we are the second. Some of that is because we're careful about what we put in front of our clients, but part of that is because it's so easy now to prototype it. In some sense, we probably shouldn't even be creating slide decks. We should just prototype the thing that we're thinking about and actually putting it in a customer's hands saying, hey, is this what you're looking for? What do you like? What don't you like? Can you click these buttons? Tell me what's working, what's not, right? So from an AI standpoint, what do we really have that we're heavily using? It's the rapid prototyping and ability to actually spin up new things ourselves and then go out and test those in the hands of customers, right? On the other side, it's a little bit more amorphous. We don't want to expose our clientele to anything might not be as secure, as locked down as all of our other systems. So we're very careful about what we put from them. Doing the vibe coding, it's actually a lot more about having our existing engineers, the coding tools to accelerate their process. We are seeing a massive lift in terms of the speed with which our teams, our technologists can actually build new technology, can actually build new products.
I feel like that's often the narrative. It's either it's going to do everything, can't do anything, where it's like something in between.
It's also a question of, I block a couple hours on my Saturday afternoons to play with these tools myself because you got to stay current. And I do a lot of compare and contrast and see what works and what doesn't. And context window matters, right? Are these systems remembering my coding preferences, remembering the way
Right.
I want it? Because if you're constantly recreating what you've been doing or the way you operate, it's a totally different thing. And that's, then you're not actually that much more efficient because you're so busy building out your setup, your tendencies, the way you want it. If you can store down your context and actually have it remember you and what you like, then it makes a big difference. And that's where I've seen the major lift in the last 6 or 8 months in terms of these coding tools is they've really become much better at storing that context.
And I feel like for folks who are in tech and following AI, you see all these progressions, but folks who are not, right? And they see AI and hallucinations and financial services, you're like, whoa, with this. And like, what are the kind of conversations you have with folks being like, well, how do these two things sort of merge together?
The first question in my mind is always, what's the data you're looking at? And I've used this analogy for years now. AI is an engine. Data is fuel. You need to know what fuel is going into that engine. You can't fly a fighter jet with low test gasoline, right? Like you need jet fuel. And so a lot of what's happening where you see hallucinations, where you see problems with AI, it's actually a data problem, right? They're filling in the system is filling in the gaps where it doesn't have quality data. And the question then becomes, okay, if AI is an engine and data is fuel, we know that fuel providers are a lot bigger businesses than engine makers are. And that begs some interesting questions about the AI economy. It begs some interesting questions about, okay, there's also the refinery layer. There's the pipelines, right? Like if you can push this analogy pretty far and say, look, there are a lot of ways to distill down that data to make it useful to different types of engines. And that's essentially what we're seeing is people are taking, these, in some sense, very broad instruments in terms of these AI engines and saying, oh, it'll answer every problem under the sun. It'll answer every question for me. And it's like, well, actually, no, you have the wrong kind of data, or you just don't have data there. And that's where hallucinations come in, is these systems are designed to fill in those gaps.
Right.
And that's where you run into the problem of, doesn't have earnings data, and you ask it for what was the result of the last earnings.
How are you thinking about large language models and some of the smaller language models who are maybe a bit more pointed and they're looking at one type of data? How does that fit in?
I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing on small language models. Domain expertise matters, right? Context matters. There's nuance to the types of questions. There's nuance to the framing. If you look at what we do in financial services, there's regulatory implications too. And I think financial services and healthcare are just areas where the use of AI has to be very different than in other industries, because the stakes are much higher and the regulation is much different. For me, looking at some of the small language model applications here is really, that's a potential game changer, because you can use the large language model setup and drill down much more deeply into the thing you actually care about, the thing you're actually focused on answering a question.
And generally that's going to give you better results, right? You're going to get more
targeted,
more targeted, more predictable results there.
Yeah.
What's your sense of AI on terms of, like, I hate to use this kind of word, reimagining like the architecture of a firm's data?
It's how you organize the information. Yeah, LLMs are great at solving for the generic use case. They're very bad at specifics. You need to have layers that allow them to train on the specifics. That's where we're getting a lot better by leveraging knowledge graphs. That's actually really made a big difference here. I've really seen that in the last 6 months or so.
It's just more pointed you're getting, because it's basically, my understanding is like you're sort of scaling the knowledge graph.
And part of it is also the interrelationship between entities. I know people like to talk about LLMs as they're a thing that like just emerged natively.
But true.
That's not true. When I was running Prattle, it was the first startup I built, and we were an NLP company from day one, and we ran into a named entity recognition problem. There was a problem with the supply chain data. No one actually had a data set that differentiated between different models of Boeing planes. I was trying to solve a problem of just the naming of those entities so that we could trace that out. And it turned out that we had to build a system to solve that problem. What would now be a small language model, but back then felt very large to us. It was the first time I saw the power of using transformers in this way to solve a really, in that case, very targeted problem, but with a very general solution.
I wonder how the terminology is going to evolve, because when you say knowledge graphs and ontology, it's like, oh no. But if you say Facebook connections, right? Like a map of your Facebook connections, it's sort of like that, right? Like you can figure things out a bit better.
What's interesting to me is for many years, people were trying to figure out how do we visually represent language. The beautiful thing about where AI has gone is that it's so natively tied to language. That's actually what drives all of our decisions. The reason I even got into NLP, I was a game theorist originally. I was modeling small group decision dynamics. During the financial crisis, I thought the most interesting small group of decision makers was the Federal Reserve.
Which was true. Yeah.
Right. But it turns out nobody was making investment decisions based on their decision dynamics. Nobody was making investment decisions even based off policy, really. It was all about communication, because that's what moves the market. Think about what is it that really captured like the cultural zeitgeist. It's been language. It's just, and that's actually where AI has been most successful, is helping us with language. It's not visual representation. It's actually just how we communicate.
I'm curious, like, you're someone who's been in this intersection for a long time, right? And now imagine you're a financial service person, executive, you've been in the space and you just are bombarded with this AI thing. So can you talk to somebody who would be new to be like, what would you do?
Using AI for rapid prototyping is so valuable, right? I've got, within Fidelity Labs, we've got about 300 people, got 7 startups. Several of them are AI native. And then we've also got 4 entrepreneurs in residence who are working on new ideas.
Wow.
EIRs are rapidly iterating on new ideas because they have access to AI tools. The companies that are more mature, they started out being deep into data science. As the AI tools have caught up to where they were from a data science perspective, they've been able to transform and accelerate the pace of their work as well.
Can you talk about the evolution of them?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of concrete examples. If we're talking about AI specifically, I think the 2 most mature businesses and labs are a perfect place to start. So Safir and Catchlight. Safir is an AI-driven compliance tool, right? So being able to train on compliance language to actually understand what is a red, yellow, green flag, right? And actually be able to automate away a lot of the painful process that has been done heavily manually. For that is by definition a great screen, right? And then kind of the inverse of that is, hey, what about the client side? What about the customers? And that's where Catchlight comes in is being able to understand what's the profile of somebody I should care about, I should want to reach out to if I'm a financial advisor. And how do I know that, that person A or person B is the right profile for my wealth management practice? And that's where Catchlight's been able to model on a whole bunch of demographic information and be able to say, oh, based on what you're good at as an advisor, based on the offering you have, this is the right clientele for you. Reach out to this person, not that one.
That is a very useful tool internally for folks figuring out, okay, where's my time best spent?
Exactly. And ultimately, this is where AI is still best, is augmenting human efficiency.
What do you think is underhyped or overhyped in the space?
I think there's a lot that's overhyped about we're going to replace X, Y, or Z profession, right? I've heard cries about this for 15 years. AI tools are still not in a place where you're going to replace somebody who is a true expert in what they do. They may augment that person, make them more effective, more efficient, but you're not going to replace the professional with decades of experience who really knows what they're doing. The flip side, and this is where I think is underhyped, is I actually think that the talk of, oh, we're going to be able to replace a bunch of younger folks who are new in the workforce. And you hear people talk about, oh, who needs junior investment bankers is the example I always get thrown to me, or who needs junior attorneys or paralegals? The answer is actually the inverse of that. Now you have junior attorneys, you have junior investment bankers who have access to knowledge and a skill set. They don't necessarily have the same pattern recognition. They don't necessarily have the same life experiences, but I actually think the underhyping is how much this empowers a younger generation to be more effective. And I think that all the talk about, oh, we're going to displace the junior worker with the AI tool, I'm yet to see that actually in a widespread way.
There's very little data to back that up. I think it's even the inverse. The Wall Street Journal wrote a story about this company Off Deal, the M&A bankers who are doing small deals because now it's more efficient, it's more economically viable.
You're the second person today to mention that to me.
Oh, really?
This is always the evolution of technology, right? Yeah, okay, there are fewer farriers than there were when we had horse-drawn carriages, but like, you know what? There are a lot more auto mechanics. If you look at the uptake on who is most comfortable with these tools, it's younger people. No big surprise. Younger people are always the ones who are the fastest adopters of technology. But in the last 6 months, 9 months, what you've seen is this massive wave of older folks who have become AI native. Like I'm watching this happen with my own parents who are defaulting to asking, an AI engine rather than going to Google. Right.
Right.
And it's like, I wouldn't have expected that, but actually there's a whole older generation who finds this fascinating and find it. And so I think that's a really interesting component of this, is just who's adopting the technology. And then if you look at some of the applications that are actually really taking off, if you look at where AI tools are most effective, again, it's the personal touch. It's the chatting component to that. So some of the AI coaching, AI therapy tools, there's something really
Right.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's, if you'd asked me a year ago if that was a domain I thought was going to take off, I was absolutely not. And now it absolutely is.
To your point, someone did a survey about younger folks relying on AI for financial services advice, which is a whole other issue with, the regulatory regime. But it's people are aware it hallucinates, but they're trusting it with or asking it for advice on those kind of topics.
Well, and this becomes a data problem, right? If it has data on you, who you are, your preferences, your needs, what you're looking for. If you're trying to pay down student loan debt, or if you're trying to pay for medical bills, or
Right.
whatever it is, right? From a financial planning standpoint, AI is really interesting. From an investment strategy standpoint, I've seen some things that are really interesting, but it's not quite there yet.
Fidelity has many clients. If they're going to be listening, what do you sort of anticipate for them coming down the way?
Yeah, I think there's a lot coming down the way. One, I think the most opaque area of markets by far is still privates, and that area is ballooned. You have 700 plus unicorn companies right now. You have 1,600 plus. I say unicorn private companies, 1,600 plus public companies in the U.S. alone, $1 billion. The new mid cap is functional at private, which is really interesting. As we try to parse through the data, AI becomes a really interesting toolkit for us to be able to do that. That market is thriving and will continue to. A lot of the technology tools we've got now allow us to dissect what's a good investment decision in that space in a way we just couldn't a few years ago. Financial planning is a space where a lot of the tools that people have been using have been very manual. There's an opportunity for us to advance that from a technology perspective.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me, Evan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt.